Antonio Guterres is now speaking live from Cairo along with the Egyptian foreign minister. Let's listen in.
For his critical leadership. I am in the Middle East on a humanitarian mission at a moment of profound crisis, a crisis unlike any the region has seen in decades. That crisis was triggered by the atrocious 7 October Hamas attacks that killed, injured and kidnapped a large number of civilians from Israel and indeed from around the world. But this led Israel to a total siege on Gaza and a relentless bombing campaign with an ever
المكثفة والتي طالت بشكل كبير.
But also journalists, health workers, and many others, including...
All right, that's UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. So the head of the United Nations, he's in Egypt. Obviously, Egypt playing a major role here since Egypt controls the Rafah border crossing, the only door out of Gaza right now that is not also controlled by the Israelis. And he is speaking along with the Egyptian foreign minister. Now, remember the context. Number one is that the UN Secretary-General has called for a ceasefire. That's language that is new as of yesterday or the previous day, and the first 10 or 11 days of this crisis, the UN actually hadn't called at the highest echelon for a ceasefire, but now he is doing so. And there are many questions around how that aid is going to be delivered, around the volume of the aid, the amount, where it's going, and how it's even going to be distributed within the Gaza Strip, given that no fuel is going to be allowed in. As we keep an eye on that, and we keep an eye on the skies over Gaza, that live shot just moments after we saw continued bombardments on Gaza City, I want to bring in Sultan Barakat. You are professor of public policy at Hamad bin Khalifa University here in Qatar. Thank you for being with us. I want to talk with you a little bit about what the Arab and Muslim nations can do at this stage for the Palestinians. I say this because there were statements coming out of Iran today saying the Islamic world's silence is completely unjustified. This was in a phone call with Qatar. And now you see the UN Secretary-General in Egypt. There's also the King of Jordan, who's in Egypt. Where does diplomacy stand right now within the Arab world in support of the Palestinians?
Well, the two words within the Arab world and the Muslim world, there are the states and the people on the streets. I think the public has made their views very, very clear throughout the Muslim world.
We've seen protests.
Huge protests, demonstrations, and so on. But when it comes to the states, they have been more reluctant to make a direct statement against the situation in Gaza, partly because of fear of the implication that may bring vis-a-vis the United States, in particular the relationship with the United States. Others have already tied themselves into processes of normalization with Israel and or already had peace agreements with Israel. So, for example, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, even Sudan.
Well, Jordan and Egypt,
Bahrain,
that's decades old. But countries, the Abraham Accords, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, that's very recent. Do you think that their normalizing of ties with Israel, do you think that could become more fragile as this conflict continues?
It has to. It must become more fragile. I mean, the problem now is that they're still banking on the fact that there is hope in the process. But their public will be very much against it. It will be very, very difficult.
Hope in what process?
In the normalization, that it can continue as if it hasn't been interrupted and so on. But I think the public opinion now is very much against
Respectfully, and I'm sorry to do this, but let me interrupt you because we now have the translation for the UN Secretary-General. Let's listen in.
And Rafah crossing board are the only lifeline to those in Gaza Strip. For Egypt once again proves that it is a pillar of peace and security in the region. It is the only country capable of defusing violence. The longer the war, the more the violence will become. And consequently, the more losses there will be in human life and property. We are demanding an immediate ceasefire and the quick and swift delivery of relief aid. I will put this humanitarian mission into effect from now and from Egypt. We shouldn't lose sight that we are all anticipating and looking forward to a long-lasting, permanent and final solution with the establishment of as a dependent Palestinian state side by side with Israel.
Okay, we've just been listening to Antonio Guterres. He's calling on Hamas to release hostages. He's calling on Israel to give unrestricted access to aid into Gaza. He is calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. Again, that's his new position. It wasn't his position for the first 10 days of the conflict, but it is as of, I think, 48 hours ago. And he says that Gaza needs aid at a scale and on a sustained basis. What do you make of the position of the UN since the beginning of this conflict?
I must say it was disappointing in the sense no one knows Gaza more than the UN. The UN has been in Gaza for 75 years, so they know exactly the situation. He does know very well, Guterres, that this did not start on the 7th of October. This has a long history. The UN itself has been the victim of Israeli attacks many times over the years. So all he does really, he's trying to put it within an acceptable framework for the superpowers, and that's basically the United States and Britain and France at the moment. So he's trying to walk a tightrope between satisfying them and their protection of Israel, which he fully understands that Israel enjoys an exceptionalism that no other state has in the world. He has the longest history of engagement as the UN with the Israelis, understand exactly the qualities Israel enjoys as the spoiled child of the West. Now, within that, he has to come up with statements. I think upgrading to a ceasefire is a better call than initially humanitarian corridors. But ultimately, he'd be lucky if Israel allows in humanitarian corridors in a systematic and safe ways.
How does he have any leverage over what's about to happen? Aid going in, the trucks going in from Egypt into the Gaza Strip, and the conditions that are put on those trucks, how much aid, what aid can be in those trucks, et cetera. Does he have a say in that?
Not at this stage. I mean, the UN has the infrastructure and can deliver aid and can guarantee for Israel that this aid will not make it into the hands of Hamas and will not include any weapons. And this is not the first time. They've done it many times before, and they've done it all over the world. But at the moment, the convoy that we see ready to go into Gaza is a token.
20 trucks for 2.2 million people.
20 trucks for yes, it's nothing. It is not a United Nations aid. This is mostly from Egypt. It's a token to show Egypt is doing its part. It's a token to show that Biden didn't travel on Air Force One all that distance and back for nothing. So he's done something. And it is also a way to show that the Israelis still have a space in their heart to look after these people. But we all know that the 20 trucks are not sufficient, just to supply the hospitals. Never mind the ones that were damaged, the ones that are still running. You need much more than that on a daily basis.
Yeah, you don't need to be an expert to know that you can't feed 2 million people with 20 trucks. You can't give drinking water to 2 million people.
They don't have food. Food would have spoiled by now. These have been trucks that have been there for about 10 days.
So this is for hospital equipment.
Mostly we will probably have medical equipment and hygiene kits to help limit the spread of diseases. This is the next thing that is coming to hit Gaza. There will be a spread of epidemics across the area, largely because of failing of sewer system. Without electricity, there's no way to pump the sewers, and this will now come to haunt everyone, aside from the fact that there is no fresh water available to the people of Gaza.
Sultan Barakat, thank you very much for joining us this hour. Appreciate your context and analysis.